Hey,
Hi.
to the Q&A session. My name is Adrian. That was a truly thought-provoking presentation. Thank you for putting that together. Uh,
Sure.
it was at a very high and abstract level of ideas. So maybe let's try to get a bit more in depth and ask some more additional questions to understand all the things that you were talking about. And I'm also inviting everyone that is joining us for the Q&A session. If you want to ask questions, just please type them in the chat, and we'll get to them. One of the interesting things that you were talking at the very beginning was the psychology and the psychology of the founders, and you were describing certain traits of character that are kind of predetermining to a large extent the probability of people asking the questions that would kind of change the status quo. They would become founders of innovative companies. Is there the statistical data? Does it show that, or are these like anecdotal examples? Is this something that can be found across the industry?
Yeah, I don't think that there are specific statistics about, whether or not someone kind of psychologically lives on the Asperger's or autism spectrum. But I do think that you see more commonly than not that this tends to be a common characteristic of the most successful companies. I think the corollary to that, like if you look at the flip, oftentimes what you see is that the most conventional people, the ones that are like coming out of business school, is what I would call like a whiteboard founder, where they say like, I want to start a company. I don't really care what the company is. I just want to start a company. And they start writing a bunch of ideas on a whiteboard for what they might do. And then they just like pick the one that seems the best and move forward. Those types of companies are generally much harder because the founders don't have a personal connection. They don't feel passionate about it. It's not like they're waking up in the morning and saying, if I don't solve this problem, I'm never going to be able to live with myself. Whereas you get a lot of these really eccentric personalities that is like core to who they are, is that, Elon had to start SpaceX. He had to. That was like the thing that was consuming him. And you could say the same for Bill Gates. You could say the same for Peter in his early PayPal days. So I do think that is more common than most people realize.
So then, what if you don't think that you have those psychological features, but you would still want to be an entrepreneur? You have ideas and you want to put them into practice. Are those specific traits something that is trainable? You can learn to be more curious about things, to be more open to listen to other people, to be more empathetic.
Yeah, I mean, it oftentimes comes down to motivation. I think you just have to constantly be asking yourself these questions. I don't think that I'm particularly eccentric or unique in the way that a lot of these founders are. So I've had to personally kind of train myself in this exercise. Like when I desire something, it's like asking the question, well, why? Why do I desire this? Why do I want it? Do I want it because other people want it? Do I want it because this is like a way to like pursue something that's aspirational? Like I didn't go to business school, but I can imagine a world in which came out of business school and my peers were going off and starting companies. And it's like, well, maybe the thing that I'm supposed to do to be like successful and ambitious is start a company. These are all really bad reasons to do things, though. And so the real question is to constantly be asking yourself, why? Is this motivated out of some original idea, or is it motivated out of my interest in imitating what other people want or are doing?
And again, I'm encouraging everyone that has joined this session to ask questions in the chat. But I would like to go to something that you were talking about when you're describing optimistic, pessimistic, and you're referring to certain parts of the world, certain countries. And in the current context, we're seeing a lot of, let's say, political involvement in the space of technological companies that are less mobile or transcontinental as they were thought to be 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And of course, we saw in certain markets like China that a lot of traditional Silicon Valley companies did not have access to, just because of the closed system. Same thing in Russia, but we're witnessing this right now in the US as well. How, when you talk about the future, how is this new kind of like political intense aspect affecting entrepreneurs? Because no one was thinking 10 years ago about that.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the like .com crash in 2000, basically what it seems like happened at a macro level is that when the recession started happening, the economy had to fall back on what was working, and what was working was not the tech economy. The tech economy was super immature, and so all these tech stocks kind of collapsed. This time around, with uncertainty around COVID and the macroeconomic environment, it's kind of the opposite. The businesses that aren't working are the old economy. The businesses that are working are the tech economy. And so that it's like completely had this paradigm shift that is going to make for a really interesting acceleration in the predominance of technology platforms that maybe it would have happened in 5 or 10 years. Now it's going to happen in 12 to 18 months. And so I do think that that is interesting. On the geopolitical side, I think this is a really bizarre period of time because, we saw in the 90s, you had this kind of, post the fall of the Berlin Wall, you had this kind of crazy acceleration of globalization where it was this idea of like free trade and, basically like trying to bring everybody up by the bootstraps to like some sort of international standard of living. And I think what we ended up finding out going into like the mid to 2010s, like 2015, 2016, obviously you started to see a lot of these kind of populists started getting elected in the United States and Great Britain and in other places. And that was kind of a revolt against globalism. It was saying like these policies actually didn't work for the middle class in a lot of these countries. And so there's kind of a return to nationalism that's happening. And you see that tension kind of pulling at the seams with the way that the United States presidential administration is handling the conversation with TikTok. But we also shouldn't forget that China has been doing this to other nations' technologies for decades. It's not like the U.S. banning TikTok or threatening to ban TikTok is the first time anyone has ever done this. It's like, China bans everything basically that gets built in the United States, if not, getting direct, like actually acquiring their IP in order to do business in China. And so I would expect that while we're getting more interconnected via things like what we're doing right now, like we can digitally have this conversation over Hopin or over Zoom, we're also policy-wise, politically breaking apart into these national pockets that could fundamentally change the tech ecosystem over the next 5 or 10 years, just from a policy and regulatory perspective.
That's certainly interesting times to to try to be an entrepreneur in. One last question, since I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. For people that would want to go deeper into some of the aspects that you were talking about, or sources for your knowledge and inspiration into these topics, what kind of like books, blogs, articles would you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned in the presentation, my partner at Founders Fund, Peter Thiel, he wrote a book called 0 to 1 that is fantastic, and I would recommend anyone in the tech industry to read it. He kind of talks about his experience at PayPal and like how psychology drives these big tech shifts. And then for source material that Peter would recommend, there is a philosopher, a theologian named Rene Girard that was a professor at Stanford until he passed away about 5 or 6 years ago. And Rene Girard talks about his theory is called mimetic theory, and it's this idea about the imitative desire of humans, that we're copycats basically. And he goes deeply into like how that plays out in culture and society. And that's kind of the root for a lot of these ideas that Founders Fund thinks about kind of as our central dogma for the way that we invest. So those would be probably the two things that I would recommend: 0 to 1 and any of the source material from Rene Girard. Probably the best one, the easiest to access, is just called the Girard Reader, and you can order it on Amazon or whatever your local bookseller, online bookseller is, depending on where you're coming from in the world. Yeah, those would be my top two.
All right, great. Let's see. We thanks to Vlad for also pushing people with questions. We're starting up now with some questions. All right, let's see what Mihai wants to ask. So he owns a small software company in Timișoara in Romania, specialized in cybersecurity. He thinks the easiest idea to get funding for a fresh idea is to take money. I didn't really get that part.
That's interesting. I'm reading his message right now. I'm gonna also silence my Slack because it's just started popping. So 1 second. Cool. So yeah, I mean, it's basically Mahaya. It seems like you're suggesting it's like buzzwords.
Yes.
I don't think that that's incorrect. I think that right now, money is really kind of cheap. The interest rates are really low. The Fed is like printing currency with reckless abandon to keep the economy afloat during COVID, and basically like there's a lot of investors out there that are exhibiting the same behaviors as mimetic founders. They're mimetic investors, and so they want to like latch on to these ideas that are basically becoming memes. And we saw this early on in COVID, where like every company seemed to become a COVID company overnight. It was like they were either trying to make ventilators or get involved with vaccines or get involved with like data analytics. Ultimately, like after 2 months, like it was over. Like those companies were back to their original businesses. It turns out that there wasn't really a good way for them to contribute, and so I think that you're right, there are investors that are just looking to invest in memes. But I think that like, it's not a sustainable model. Like if as a company, in particular, Mahai, for you, as a cybersecurity company, the question for you is going to be like, what is the uniqueness of your business and how is that long-term sustainable? And I think this is a tough question to answer. And it's the question that every entrepreneur, I think, needs to answer in a novel way for their own business. And I'm seeing that you're saying that Romanian money is quite expensive and investors are scarce. You're absolutely right. I spent like a week in Oradea and met with a bunch of people in the tech community. Definitely understand that it's very different depending on where people are geographically. Although, as I said in earlier, I think it's never been easier than it is today to meet with investors across international borders. I live in San Francisco. I'm not meeting with founders in person in San Francisco. It's literally not different at all for me to meet a founder that's a block away from me or a founder that's 10,000 miles away from me. So building out that network is admittedly hard, but it is possible. And my core answer would still be that uniqueness is king. That's you have to figure that out.
Yes, and we have another question from Adrian, a bit more focused on a different age group than probably the viewers of the conference. But how can I motivate an intelligent, very imaginative, pretending to become an inventor 10-year-old child that has difficult character to focus for a startup? I think we can expand it to founders till like late 40s and 50s.
Sure. So my co-founder at Anduril is this guy named Palmer Luckey, who is the founder and inventor of Oculus, the virtual reality company that Facebook acquired for $3 billion. He's a billionaire. He just turned 27 years old, and he still kind of has the personality of like an exuberant 10-year-old. Not saying that he's not mature and adult, but he has that sort of curiosity and that sort of creativity. But he's also not like a company executive. Like it would be very hard for him to focus on like executing operationally all the tasks that are involved, like the minutia of operationally running a company. And that's okay. In fact, like we need people like that, that are visionary, that are tinkerers, that are inventors. And we need to pair them with people that are going to be able to like execute their business vision. And so, gosh, how could you best motivate that person? I think it's like feed the beast, like feed their creativity, put them in places where they have the ability to tinker and to be original, where they're not going to be criticized and belittled for having that kind of difficult sort of personality. And in a modern education system, this can be really hard. Kids are really mean to one another, but at home, you can at least exhibit to them that they're valued and loved for all of the weirdness and eccentricities that they have, and try to help them figure out ways to model themselves into a society that is not like that oftentimes.
Great. I hope that answered the questions. Thanks, Trae, for joining us. Thanks for sharing that with us. Thanks for everyone that joined to the Q&A session.
Sure. Thanks. Take care. Bye.
Bye.